You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
You're listening to IRN, 2014 Border Zone International UFO Conference.
In the Wild West days of gunslingers, outlaws, and frontier justice, there actually were hundreds of UFO sightings and encounters. A recently published book, The Real Cowboys and Aliens, UFO Encounters of the Old West, goes beyond the glamour and glitz of Hollywood and tells true stories of alien encounters in the 1800s. Our presenter, Mr. Stephen Andrasko, is a researcher and an author who speaks frequently at UFO conferences. He holds a master's degree from the University of North Texas in Denton. Please welcome Mr. Stephen Andrasko. Thank you. Hopefully I can work it. Your pointer's right there on that little thing, and this is front and back. Okay. Great. Well, thank you. I'm not used to speaking to adults. I usually do storytelling with little kids. And last week I did some scary Halloween stories, and they told me not to scare the kids too much, but I guess I don't have to worry about telling too spooky stories to you guys. Okay, we'll see if I can do that. I'm going to kind of do like they tell you in church, to keep the commandments and endure to the end, and you'll be rewarded. So I will obey the commandment, thou shalt not speak too much, and then you will be rewarded with our keynote speaker, Mr. Nick Pope, who will be coming on right after I am. So we're going to talk today about Noe's book, The Real Cowboys and Aliens. Okay. Well, we heard a little bit today from Javier. He was talking about some of the folk stories and strange tales that were told down by his ancestors, I should say, in the Coyame area. Stories about fireballs floating in the sky, blue flames coming from the ground, the Luchuga owls, the white owls flying. He talked about some big, ugly, scary-looking dogs that could have been chupacabra-type animals. So there's a lot of tales that come from this area. If you go into the Big Bend area, you could see a lot of folk art by the Indians that were written on the rock art. And all throughout history, you sometimes see strange depictions of humanoid-type people that are flying, whether they be of religious significance, of tales of the origins of their people, or things to help keep evil spirits away. Well, you heard several talks today about in 1947 the Roswell crash, and other things, the 1974 Coyame incident, 1948 Laredo, and 1955 the Del Rio crash or incident that happened around this area. But what about before airplanes were invented? Did people see these kinds of things before the Wright brothers, or before hot air balloons, or any other type of air transportation was discovered? Well, we kind of go back, like I say, in the 1947, and when Kenneth Arnold in Washington was flying, and he reported seeing these flying, what he called discs that looked like saucers turned upside down. So the term flying saucer originated. And when, like we heard earlier this morning about the Roswell crash, they talked about a saucer or flying disc. This little bit on how this book came about. There's Mr. Torres and John LeMay. They're visiting the crash site. there, and they began to talk about, what about sightings prior to Roswell? Are there anything reported in the newspapers or magazines or other things that were that took place prior to the 1947 when it became very popular to talk about UFOs and flying things? So did cowboys really see UFOs? Let's see how Hollywood
I woke up in the desert, like I've been dropped out of the sky. You got a name?
I don't know.
I'm gonna need you to come with us. Wouldn't do that if I was you.
Yeah, that's Lonergan, boss.
I want that man. You give him to me now.
I need to know where you came from.
So do I.
You don't remember anything.
What the hell?
Maria! They're coming back! What the hell were those things?
Why are you asking me?
They've got my son.
My wife. I need that weapon.
That's the only thing that counts.
What about the other people? Are they alive?
They won't be for long. You just have to work together.
Come on!
Who is she?
She's the only one who knows who I am.
You know who you are. You just have to remember. They'll come back with more, and there will be no survivors. It's what they did to my people.
I've seen good men do bad things. Bad men do good things. You go get our people back.
They're here.
Should we step in?
Looks like he's doing fine.
God damn.
Well, I like that movie. I've seen it several times. Now, did cowboys have any shootouts with aliens? Well, we're going to take a look in this book of some events that did happen and some encounters that did occur prior to flying machines or airplanes being invented in the United States. This was a little review of Noe's book, which came out on the same day that the movie Cowboys and Aliens was released. It says, "Hey Hollywood, if you're going to make a big budget movie about extraterrestrial contact with Wild West cowpunchers, can't you at least try to get it right?" It said, "The real Cowboys and Aliens, a UFO Encounters of the Old West, sets the record straight. Using information gathered from yellowed newspaper clippings from the 1800s to tell of numerous close encounters between farmers and cowboys on the range and mysterious visitors in the night." One of the fun things about this is a lot of these stories come from right here in the great state of Texas. And we'll take a look at them now. Well, the first one in the book happens to a mountain man in Montana around Cadott Pass. And mountain men, like we heard from Javier, a lot of these stories take place, occur to people that are of pioneer stock. And so they're out and about in the elements, earning a living, farming, trapping, mining, being shopkeepers, soldiers. And Lumley was one of those. He was a fur trapper. And in 1864, while he was out, he witnessed a bright object that came through the sky. He saw it disintegrate or break off into smaller pieces that he said looked like a rocket in the sky. And then he heard a loud explosion, and he smelled the smell of sulfur. Now, this took place up in the Rocky Mountains, and it was at night, so he waited till the next morning to go and explore and see if he could find the cause of this great ball in the fire and explosion that he saw. The next morning, he found a big, wide swath of destruction where trees and rocks had been leveled, and he found at the end of this trail of destruction a black, what he described, a black craft of some type that looked like a burnt rock. Inside, he actually looked inside or went inside this, what he described, large burnt rock that had several compartments inside. And carved on the walls of the compartments, he saw, these types of writing that he could not decipher, which he described looking like, Egyptian type writing. Our next story takes place in Kansas and also in northern Texas. And on several consecutive days, people in the area saw what they described as a flying serpent in the sky. There were several places in Texas, down around Wichita Falls, and up here, north of Joplin, Missouri, where Fort Scott took place. Many people witnessed the one in Fort Scott, where the ones in Texas, there weren't as many witnesses. They described it as a huge flying snake flying through the sky. And we'll talk about some other ones that saw a UFO or a flying snake or reptile similar to that in a little bit. Okay, this one is also an interesting story because it's one of the first instances where they describe a flying saucer as a saucer-shaped. And this was also seen in Texas and written about in the newspaper. Most of these newspaper accounts, after they tell their story, they have affidavits from the people that are their neighbors that the person telling this story would never tell a lie, was honest throughout all their life, and could be certified that this story was not made up. It said that the newspaper article said, when directly over him, it was about the size of a large saucer and was evidently of great height. He described it at first as the size of an orange when he looked into the sky, and as it got closer and closer to him, it grew larger and larger. It appeared to move with space, through space, at a wonderful speed. The brightness of it, even though during the day, was too bright for him to look at. And that, like I say, that took place near Wichita Falls and up near Fort Scott, Kansas.
I was very influenced by J. Allen Hynek because he was not looking at UFOs as science fiction, but he was looking at them as science speculation.
And he was employed by the government for Project Blue Book for 20 years, investigating all of these UFO things that were so big in the 50s.
In a nutshell, Hynek was a disbeliever who became a believer.
He found the witness reports very credible, and he found so many similarities from so many portions of America as well as throughout the world that he became a convert to the fact that the government was hiding something and something was afoot.
At the end of it, the government disbanded Project Blue Book and said no evidence of any kind, of any sort. And Dr. Hynek said, who was very much a skeptic and wanted to be a disbeliever because that was the scientific approach. Dr. Hynek said they had several hundred cases of absolutely unexplained UFOs. He didn't say what they were. You know, he wasn't saying they were from outer space. But he said, we came across stuff, there was no possible way of debunking some of these things. It was unexplainable.
So I met with him, and I used him, and I picked his brain, and he consulted with me. He's even in a movie in a bit of a scene in the third act. And I owe a lot to his instilling in me a professional's point of view on this kind of field reporting. And he helped me make the movie more credible than it would have been without his existence.
The term Close Encounter of the Third Kind is taken from Dr. Alan J. Hynek's book. He's who created the term Close Encounters.
Well, the Close Encounter of the First Kind is one that is close, but nothing really happened.
Close Encounter of the First Kind is visible contact with a UFO.
Forget the shape and forget how fast it's going. It's something that you just can't explain.
Close Encounters of the Second Kind are those which leave a physical trace. Holes in the ground, fern rings, broken tree branches,
Telephone lines down,
animals disturbed,
the stopping of car engines.
and the Close Encounters of the Third Kind are the most interesting of all.
Close Encounter of the Third Kind is really when you meet them.
Well, this clip, if you could understand, was Steven Spielberg, and some of the crew of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind talking about Dr. J. Allen Hynek. And he was a researcher of UFOs, and he stated that this case of the farmer seeing the UFO and the flying saucer was what he described as a classic sighting of a daylight disc. And many of the discs that we see are those classic sights, but some of the ones that the farmers saw, the way they described them in words and in images that they were familiar with. Now, of course, being down here in Presidio, you'll be very familiar with the ghost lights or the Marfa lights, which a couple nights ago we stopped on the way here and spent about a half an hour observing. And if you heard from Javier talking earlier today about the balls of fire and the holes in the ground where the blue flames were coming in Coyame, very well can describe the ghost lights of Marfa. Now, a lot of people say, well, those are just car lights reflecting off the mountains. But if you've driven at night from Marfa down here to Presidio, you'll notice that there's not that much traffic running between Presidio and Marfa at night, all night, every night when these things are being seen. And of course, in 1883, they didn't really have a highway through here where obviously cars with car lights would be traveling. Robert Ellison was one of the first cowboys to see that while they were on a cattle drive, thinking that it was campfires of Apache Indians. So he and his companions rode out to try to locate these fires and were not successful. There's lots of stories, folk tales, about the lights, and I usually like to tell a story about Wicked John, who was a blacksmith, who was he was very mean and nasty, and as he got older, he even got grumpier and meaner and nasty, and he had a little run-in with some devils while he was a blacksmith, and anyway, when he died, he tried to go up to heaven, and St. Peter had locked the gates and wouldn't let him in. And he said, "Where can I go?" And he says, "Well, you got to go down to hell, So he went down to hell, and as he was going there, he passed the little devils that he'd had a run-in with. So they ran down to the gates of hell and locked the doors and wouldn't let him in because he was so mean. And so he said, "Well, if I can't go to heaven and I can't go to hell, where do I go?" And they said, "We don't care, go to Texas." So as he turned around to leave, they picked up 2 big balls of fire and threw them at him. And he picked them up, and he decided to just take them with him. So that particular story talks about Wicked John walking down the mountains each night carrying the 2 balls of fire. And so sometimes when you're observing the Marfa lights, you'll see the balls of fire coming down and then split into 2. And they say that that's Wicked John walking down the mountain with the two balls of fire. But there are many other stories that could be related to the Marfa lights. And of course, the state of Texas has built an official rest stop and viewing area there for people to stop at night, park their cars, and they have it purposely dark there so you can look out into the distance and see the lights. These are some pictures of the lights that Noe took 2 years ago. And as you could see, they flash on and then they'll fade out. Now, we were lucky enough that we were there. Greg, who's back here somewhere, had his night vision goggles with him, and we were able to observe the lights through the night vision goggles. And where you see a few lights here, when we put on the goggles, we could see about a dozen in the same area. So with those type of viewing devices, we were able to see much more. And then Noe and Ruben went out with some group of paranormal guys and did a laser experiment on the lights where they flashed the lights towards the lasers towards the lights. Noe, you want to talk about that a little? Okay. As they pointed the lasers towards the lights seemed to glow a little bit and then disappear. And many people have gone out and done experiments to try to figure out what exactly causes the lights. I've seen several shows where they have people driving their cars through the mountains and can track the headlights to see if it's them or not. That one broke in two, so that one's probably Wicked John. How many of you have been out to see the lights? Most of you? Yeah, it's quite fun. That was kind of on my bucket list, and now I've been able to do that a couple of times with tagging along with Noe. This is a picture of the place where we were just a couple nights ago. And this is a little clip that was done by one of the local television stations.
Appearing nightly in the desert, just outside Marfa, the lights are one of the longest-standing, unexplained phenomena in the United States. Explanations run the scale from a UFO landing base to uneasy spirits of long-dead Indians. But one thing is certain, the lights are there. While some people in Marfa would prefer not to talk about these glowing lights, no one will deny they exist. The Chamber of Commerce will be glad to give you directions on how to go about viewing them, and the El Paisano Hotel even conducts a regular tour.
We take people here at the hotel, usually on Saturday night. We have a scenic route that we take folks on, and part of it's the Marfa lights. And what we enjoy most that I do is taking people out that don't believe it. When you first start looking at them, you think they're car lights. But when they split up, one jumps this way and one jumps that way, well, it can make a believer out of you real quick.
My experience, when we tried to walk across the desert and catch up with them, it seemed like they always stayed just a few steps ahead of us. We could never get real close to them. So maybe they do possess intelligence. Maybe they do. Maybe they know what we're doing.
Kirby Warnock has been interested in the Marfa lights ever since he first saw them as a child. He recently spent over a year in research for an article about the lights published in Southwest Airlines magazine. Kirby agreed to be our guide in our quest to learn more about the lights.
Have you ever seen the lights?
Oh, yes, many, many times.
Our first stop was at the home of Mrs. Julia Plumley. Now, her father was one of the first people to report a sighting of the Marfa lights.
He came out here as 16 years old in 1883. And they unloaded a big herd of cattle at Alpine, which was then Murphyville.
Soon after settling in the Marfa area, the Cowboys began seeing lights that they could not explain.
But they believed in the lights.
Oh, they knew it was there, and there wasn't any other lights in those days, you know.
So it couldn't have been car lights or anything like that?
That's right.
Although the sightings continued through the years, it wasn't until World War II that the lights received much recognition. This is all that remains of what was once home for over 8,000 airmen. The Marfa Army Air Base opened on January 7th, 1943, and began training cadets to be bomber pilots.
At that time, there were no yard lights, guard lights, no electricity. Vehicular traffic was at a bare minimum because of wartime restrictions on travel, so any light was conspicuous.
Fritz Kahl was an instructor at the old air base and has been manager of the airport here in Marfa ever since. The Army never released an official statement about the lights, and Fritz says that many of the wild stories from that era were products of some vivid imaginations. But like many of the cadets, he too quickly became interested in the lights.
Socializing with the local citizens, we found out about the Marfa lights, and we're just like any 21-year-old kid, just intrigued by them.
Okay, so there's different people have had different experiences doing research on the Marfa lights, yet no one has really been able to describe what exactly they are. Now, this is one of my favorite stories in Noe's book. It's about some cowboys that were out in Nebraska, John Ellis, and when they saw a cylindrical object racing through the sky and then explode over a ravine. So they took off on their horses to go look at it, and like many modern tales of crash sites, they found a debris field, and as the vehicle crashed, it hit the ground, and with tremendous heat, the object was glowing very brightly, and they described what they described as cogwheels scattered all over the area. The object that hit was so hot that it melted the sand into glass-like beads, and the object rested down in the bottom of a ravine. They went to look at it, and the object was so bright that it was blinding them. So they decided that they would leave and come back the next morning when the object cooled down so that they could go down and maybe take a close look at it. So the next morning they went back to the ravine, and as they got close to the ravine and looked over, the object was still glowing so hot that one of the cowboys, his hair was singed and his face burnt, and blisters began to appear on his face. So they had to drag him back, and they still were not able to get close enough to the object. They took their companion back to town to have him doctored up, and news spread from there of this object, and people began to come to want to look at it. But for several days the object was very, very hot, and no one could get near enough to it to touch it. As the story goes, when many of the people came to look at it, a huge rainstorm came and began dumping rain down into the ravine, and there was like a flash flood. And after the rain stopped and they went back to look, they said they watched the thing, what was left of it, dissolve before their eyes. They described it as salt washing in. So they were astounded to see the object had melted, dissolved like water, by the water like a spoonful of salt. Scarcely a vestige of it remained. Small jelly-like pools stood here and there on the ground, but under the eyes of the observer, the object grew thinner and thinner till there was nothing but muddy water joining the rills that led the current a few feet away. The air was filled with a faint, sweetish, not like Sweden, sweet, like candy smell. It's skeptics will say, well, most UFOs didn't have what you would describe as cogwheels in modern terms, but these cowboys, they were trying to describe the pieces of the wreckage in terms that they understood, and so that's the way they described it. But the interesting part was the subject was so hot, and then that it just melted and disappeared in a rainstorm I've never heard of any other kind of UFO sighting like that. Kind of like the Witch and the Wizard of Oz, or those guys in that old TV show, the Invaders, where the aliens would disappear when he shot them and killed them. But I think that was a movie thing just to get rid of the bodies. How much time I have, Noe? Oh, so I still got some time. Now, this, of course, happened in Nebraska. Another good story, this one will go out to the California Redwood coast, is about Bigfoots. Now you're saying, what does Bigfoots and Cowboys and UFOs have to do together? Well, there was a researcher that was in California in the 1880s studying the Indian tribes there.
We're going to stop after this star because we're going to have a special musical treat.
Oh, cool. And as he was studying the Indian tribe, learning their customs and language and that, he noticed each evening one of the members of the tribe would carry meat out into the forest, raw meat. And so he began to wonder why each night he would observe this member of the tribe carrying the meat. So he decided to follow him, and he followed him until he came to a small cave in the embankment next to the river. And sitting cross-legged inside the cave was what he described as a large, hairy, muscular man-beast. The member of the tribe would take meat to this creature, and he would eat it. And he would sit there very calmly and look like very gratefully that he was being fed each night. So he began to question about this beast, and the member of the tribe told him that, well, he was just one of many that had been dropped off in the area by a flying moon that would come into the area and lower these beasts from the moon down onto the top of the mountain. And that the members of the tribe would escort these beasts back to their village, and then that they would take care of these animals. They called them crazy bears. Now this researcher, whether he met others, he doesn't describe in his diary. He only talks about the one, and he only talks about the one visit that he made to the crazy bear. But oftentimes people who talk about Bigfoot creatures, sometimes they see these Bigfoot creatures after, a short time after someone else is seeing a UFO in the area. I've had several people, I lived in White Salmon, Washington for a while, and I had several people when I lived up there tell me stories of their encounters with Bigfoot. One being a school bus driver that was driving kids to school one morning when a Bigfoot ran across the road in front of them, and he slammed on the brakes and was very angry because it very upset the children on the bus. So he got off the bus and chased after this creature, which he thought was somebody playing a joke, and it ran into the forest. And as he was chasing it, it turned around and made an ugly noise to him, and he said the smell was so bad, worse than a skunk, that he almost fainted from the smell. So he ran back, got on the bus, and took the kids to school, and that was the last time he tried to chase after anybody that looked like Bigfoot. But many times there are stories or Indian legends that describe Bigfoot or Sasquatch type characters from Canada all the way down into Arkansas, and even in the Appalachian area there are stories about Bigfoot. And I think even Lloyd Pye talked some about Bigfoot type creatures, especially some that he encountered stories about in Russia, so even in other places. So if you want to know more about the real cowboys and aliens, Noe has his book on sale there, or you can also get it online at roswellbooks.com, or some of your local libraries may have this story. There's some favorite stories in there I like to tell little kids when I go to the schools and tell stories. And there's even stories about underwater sea serpent type monsters and others in this book. It's one of my favorite books written by Mr. Torres, and
thank you.
it's available here today if you'd like to purchase one.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you.